views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk about all different kinds of things with people who put stuff out. And that means editors and writers and journalists and photographers and videographers and filmmakers. And I say that advisedly because our second segment is going to include a whole filmmaker series. But we're going to start off with a staff reporter from the city. She's been with us before. Say hello to Rachel Holliday Smith. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
You wrote an article that caught my eye and caught our producer Rebecca Hemick's eye. And the headline was, "The city kicks thousands of homeless back to the shelters from hotels." I understand from the Times there's been a bit of an update. I'll just give you the background from my perspective. As we watch the pandemic develop, as we watch the hotels go empty, and I'm not only the smaller ones, but the big hotels, nobody had been staying in them. Boy, what an opportunity for housing or for homelessness or whatever. So why don't you give us a little background about what brought you to that article, and then we'll try and update it as well.
Yeah, of course. So what brought me to it was the fact that there's a huge shift for homeless New Yorkers happening right now. As you mentioned in the article, thousands of homeless New Yorkers were living in these hotels for the past year plus. And myself and colleagues have done reporting about how much that changed their lives. You know, they had their privacy. They had their own room. They had a clean place to go. They could, take their medication on time. They could take showers. They just had a little bit more stability in their lives.
And let me add one more thing. They could go to work and come back, because we know many of the homeless people are working people, not able to earn enough money. That's part of it. So
yes, ahead. Absolutely. Many homeless New Yorkers are in fact working. And so, but right now, the mayor decreed, and the Department of Homeless Services is carrying this out. They are moving all of those people who were living in hotels under this program as an emergency measure during the COVID-19 crisis back to what is called a congregate shelter, which is those big shelters where many people sleep to a room, usually single adults. They're a little bit different for families, but we're talking about the single adult population going back into these barrack style, dorm style shelters. And I wrote about, focused on one shelter in particular on the Upper West Side, the Lucerne Hotel, which has been really quite controversial. There's been a lot of uproar in that neighborhood about that location. Single men lived there. Then there was a backlash to the backlash where some locals really took those men under their wing and helped them and volunteered to try to make them feel more welcome in the neighborhood. So it was kind of a hot button place. And I interviewed the men as they were getting on the bus to go back to a shelter on the Bowery.
There's a couple of things at work there. Number one, and this, people who will watch our Bronx Talk this week, they'll know that we did a thing about the design of a homeless shelter in Hunts Point. What we were told during that program, and I'm sure you know it, they don't want to go to the shelters. They would rather, it sounds inconceivable, but the shelters are so bad. They're so dangerous. They're so unhealthy. They're so unpleasant, on and on and on. They're not safe. People would say, I'd rather sleep in the street, or especially now, it's summertime. It's not freezing cold. They'd rather be in the streets than in the shelters. Can't we work something out that we keep people, that we make use of these empty rooms? We pay the hotels, we'll make a little money that they were not making. Can't we figure this out?
That was the idea behind this program, certainly. And the advocates would say, yes. The advocates would say, why are you disrupting, speaking to the mayor, why are you disrupting this program that worked so well? It seemed like a win-win. These people have stability in their lives. These hotels are mostly empty anyways. Why can't we just continue this? But the mayor says it was always a temporary program. This was never meant to be an ongoing thing. And, I'd like to do a little bit more digging into this because I don't know the answer, but I don't know the degree to which tourism coming back is affecting this. Are the hotels having more demand? Will they make their money better, having tourists come in again and taking these hotel rooms? How empty really are they? But you're absolutely right. The men who are being moved from these hotels, mostly men, really do not want to go back to the congregate shelters. Not much work has been done to improve those shelters while they've been in the hotels. So they're the same old places with the same old problems, facilities that don't work very well, a lot of unclean situations, a lot of, lack of security. So people who have to go back there are quite unhappy to do so and are fighting to stay in.
I understand that the federal funding will end in September, but our homeless program in New York City, is my advocacy, can't rely on just temporary federal funding because of the pandemic. We have to have a plan and figure this out. The other thing that came up, which I did want to mention, and you talked about the one in the Upper West Side, which was very controversial, but they also talked about on the East Side. And I know people in the Bronx are very sensitive to it, white wealthy neighborhoods are able to eject these people from their places, whereas many of our Bronx neighborhoods, end up having to house the shelters. The whole thing, what can I tell you? The whole thing is messed up. We have a problem. We got to solve this problem.
And many of the hotel shelters, as you can imagine, are in wealthy neighborhoods in Manhattan. They're in Midtown. I mentioned the Upper West Side, but actually most of them are centered in Hell's Kitchen, Midtown, places where, yes, there are many homeless people, but there have never been this many shelters, at least in recent memory. So people were really furious about it, and they were seeing the change on their street, and they were complaining about quality of life concerns. And meanwhile, you're absolutely right. In the Bronx, many communities have more than their fair share of shelters and take them fairly quietly. I'll say that with a huge caveat that that's not true across the board. But it's a really big difference between different neighborhoods when it comes to, hosting unhoused New Yorkers, of which there are so many.
My thing is in doing what I do for a living here on BronxNet Television is to show that these things can be done. And if you look at West 235th Street, across the street, a little bit down the block, across the street from Staples, in the Bronx on Broadway, there was a lot of talk about a shelter being put there. It was not a men's shelter, I understand that, but people were very concerned. But the neighborhood embraced them. They brought them in there, and now you can walk by there. There's not a peep. You don't get, and that's because they provided services. If you just throw these things up and don't provide the services, well, we're not going to get anywhere. So vision, I'm thinking vision. Maybe the new mayor will have vision. I don't know.
Yeah. And I'll say that I've done a lot of reporting on shelters, and it often is the provider of that shelter that makes a huge difference. If you've got a good provider, it's usually no problem. I reported for many months on some Crown Heights shelters that had a lot of pushback when they were first proposed, and then went back a year and a half later, interviewed the same neighbors who had sued to keep those shelters off their block. And they said, oh, it's actually no big deal. They're okay. We're pretty much okay.
They're okay. And we're not bad people. We'd like people to do better. I mean, why not? The other thing that was interesting, and this is, I understand the Legal Aid Society has interceded and they're trying to reverse the city's policy. The question will be how quickly. Another issue in this whole morass of what to do here is the notion of these people in many cases are not vaccinated. And we know what populations have mostly got vaccinated, educated people, we know the whole thing. It would be nice if we made sure that if they're staying in city-run hotels or city-funded hotels, that we got everybody vaccinated. And for me, if I was in that situation, I wouldn't want to be in a shelter without being vaccinated, especially in this day and age. We haven't cleared the thing out,
I absolutely agree. And I talked to a man who was living at the Lucerne who is not vaccinated himself, and he's going to a congregate shelter, and he said he didn't want to get vaccinated, but also had a concern about people not being vaccinated. It's incongruous. I didn't know what to make of it quite, but we don't know how many homeless New Yorkers or people in the shelters are vaccinated. The Department of Homeless Services has said how many people they vaccinated in general, but because they don't track, how many people in their system go and get vaccinated elsewhere, or who may be opting out. We don't really know the total figure, but it's certainly lower than the general population. There's a lot of hesitancy. And again, these are really crowded conditions. These shelters, have many, many people sleeping in the same room. So I am personally worried about the variants here and the people who are not vaccinated. And there remains to be seen how that plays out with this move, with thousands of homeless people moving back to these shelters.
Yeah, I can't forgive, the gentleman who says, you be vaccinated, but I don't want to be vaccinated. I'm not going there. What do you, now Eric Adams has talked about supporting the notion of using hotels. Do you have a sense if, and my guess is, by the way, with the new city council, I know many of the presumed elected people who will be elected to the city council from the Bronx, I think they would all be for a kind of a new look at homelessness. Do you have a sense of what we're in for with Eric Adams and the new city council?
I haven't read up on that a ton. I really don't know exactly, especially in the Bronx, I don't know the council members, like what they're thinking about housing or how they're thinking about dealing with the homeless population. But I know, there's a lot of new progressive voices and a lot of people who say, the solution here is housing. It's, that little thing. And Eric Adams himself has said, he's willing to do some things that previous mayors are not willing to do to up the number of units that are, actually produced and bringing new units online. But we've heard these promises before from other mayors and other city councils. We need more housing, but it comes down to who has the political will to actually make it happen, especially in neighborhoods that don't want it. And that's a huge factor here. I mean, you see one shelter open on the Upper West Side. I'll go back to that just because, it is quite a contentious area. And you just get enormous pushback, lawsuits, people spending serious money to keep those folks out of their neighborhoods. Same fights with
of course, for many of our Bronx neighborhoods, those are people with money and with political clout. And of course, people in the Bronx who fight these things, would like to have, kind of an equal opportunity to really evaluate what should be done. Now, just before we run out of time, for you, what's next? Are you working more on this? Are you working more on stuff?
I'm tracking this a bit and just keeping my eye on these hotel shelters for sure. But I'm also working with some colleagues to look at exactly why people are not taking the vaccine, vaccine hesitancy, what those populations look like, where we're seeing vaccines not being taken, which pockets of the city still maybe remain as places where you can convince people to take the vaccine. And also just, we're past the election, but there's still some explaining to do to people about, the final count, what it means for the new city council, who the speaker might be. I mean, there's lots of things to catch up on there.
One of the things that characterizes the city, which I appreciate, is the in-depth reporting. You don't just throw something against the wall and, well, here's your article. We get the study, we get the investigation, and I and many others, of course, certainly appreciate your work and your colleagues at the city. I did see that the governor talked about 1% of 1% of the population still is testing positive, so it's out there.
Very much.
Anyway,
and it's
Rachel,
slightly.
We got to run. Rachel Holliday Smith from the city, thank you so much. Thanks for your great work. We'll keep reading you in the city, and we'll appreciate it and see you next time.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, folks. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the Mott Haven Film Festival. It's a Bronx thing. You got to be part of it. Don't go away.